I'm very excited about today's discussion on how rural investments can boost nature. We're going to have Laura Ellis, as I mentioned, with us from ALUS to give you some specifics and just how investing in nature can help with the rural landscape. So Eugenia, you can go to my first slide.
Okay.
Sorry, second slide.
And Laura has just joined us. Welcome, Laura.
Hi, everybody.
Hi, Laura. Thanks so much for dashing over. I know the commute from one Zoom webinar to another is quite extensive. We've just done a welcome and I'm just going to launch into my slides. So sit back and take a breather or have a drink of water. For those of us who don't know Wildlands League, we are experts in protecting the natural world. Go ahead, Eugenia. We've been around for 50 years. Next. Sorry, Eugenia, it's not, oh, there we go. Okay, so we've been around for 50 years, starting in we go back to the 68 one. Starting with a campaign to get logging out of provincial parks. We've been very successful in doing that. We got logging out of all but one provincial park, and we still have logging in Algonquin. Next slide. That's me having a good day at the office, sitting on the water. I believe I'm in Rouge. No, actually, I'm up north. One of the amazing northern rivers in our province. But we get to go to some really good places as we try to figure out how to work on protecting nature. Next slide. There are two existential environmental issues that threaten life on this planet: climate change and the extinction of species. Our job at Wildlands League is to work on the extinction part of the equation, where protecting nature is part of that solution. And we also work where nature overlaps with climate change, both on the, in terms of how it can exacerbate climate change and also how it can help. We'll get up to 30% of the solution and perhaps even more here in Canada because we have massive carbon stores in our natural ecosystems. But if we don't actually work with nature, we won't meet our climate targets. So that's part of the work that we do, both on protecting nature to keep species around and to keep healthy ecosystems, but also in terms of part of the solution on climate change. Next slide. So COVID has taught us a great many things. One is to trust in science, and two, to take action based on science. This series that we're doing, this webinar series, is we're all in this together, is about how we can reemerge stronger. It is about rebuilding with nature as our ally, and it is focused on the regeneration economy. That's an economy that has economic activity associated with regenerating natural ecosystems and bringing nature back. Next slide, please. For us at Wildlands League, we think the best way to tackle this, to think about the regeneration economy, is to be thinking about it at a landscape level, where the sum of the parts are greater than the individual pieces, where we create new natural protected areas that might be in a city or near an urban area, where we restore the intervening landscape and renaturalize, where we build green infrastructure that can work like great connectors between those natural areas and reach out to the rural landscape. And that's where Laura's going to come in. She's going to talk about that today. Next slide. Restoring natural landscapes means that they can actually do their job. They can actually help with flood mitigation, decrease damage from ice storms, and even help in droughts. Next slide. Bringing native plant species back will actually bring nature back. You've seen lots of people talking about butterfly gardens. Other groups are working on renaturalization of our gardens, both front and back. Next slide, please. Sorry, next one. The slide with Rouge National Urban Park on it, when the ice storm hit in Toronto a number of years ago. Sorry, Eugenia, I'm looking for the slide on Rouge National Urban Park.
Sorry, Jen, I think there's a bit of a lag.
Like this. Must be, okay, so you've got it on your end. Okay, so other people are probably seeing that. So when the ice storm hit in Toronto a number of years ago, the trees that fared the best in the GTA were those in the Rouge. And that's because many of them were native species with deeper root systems that stand as a forest And so it's more resilient. So this is part of the job that we do, is around creating new natural urban protection, either in or near cities. And Rouge National Urban Park is one of those places. Next slide. But also it's really important to start thinking about how do we actually create a connected network of those. And that can really be helped by building green infrastructure. And green infrastructure is where you might be rejuvenating water courses. It could be about meadows and ponds, and building those so that they can help manage water, quite frankly, both in droughts and through floods. They're nature's sponge. They can hold water, they can release it. And finding these water courses that they can actually then extend out to the rural landscape, where you might have farmers who are helping with stewarding or even creating protected areas. You've got also private land trusts that might be working to create new protected areas, and you've got woodlot owners. And so thinking, and ranchers as well. So thinking about how you can expand this network, and it's not just isolated within a city, but think of it as this connected network. And that's what we've been starting to do in southwestern Ontario. And actually we go from southern Ontario all the way up to central Ontario. But this is not limited to just a southern Ontario landscape. This is really about how we think about landscapes, and doing this across Canada, wherever we have urban centers, and thinking out to the rural landscape and how we can create this a network of natural areas. Next slide, please. So to give you a very concrete example, and one you may have already seen in previous webinars, is that when we zoom in and we look at an area like Windsor, so I'm on the slide where it's about Windsor and the proposed Ojibwe National Park. That is a place where you can see there's all these little green bits and bobs. And what we're talking about is how can we actually start to move beyond just having a national urban park in Windsor, perhaps, but also moving out to that broader landscape. And you can see the green that is associated with it all along those corridors, that you could actually almost build a green interconnected network from Windsor all the way over to Leamington, and then maybe down to Point Pelee. And so this is the kind of landscape level thinking that we would want to see, and it would require every piece of that puzzle to get some connection. And you can see it actually reaches out into the rural landscape, as I keep mentioning. So for Windsor, that's the next slide, please. The goal is to amalgamate the areas that are on the right and add Ojibwe shores to create a new national urban park. Now, this is the goal of one project, and it's a significant one because it's a significant chain of tall grass prairie and savanna remnants, the rarest ecosystem in Canada. And in this case, it would be really tremendous if we can do that. But then if you think about that natural landscape and that landscape level, you'd connect that to natural infrastructure along Turkey Creek, out to the Cunard River, to the Cedar Creek, and couple these with agricultural lands where restoration and protection by farmers is happening, and beyond that to the broader landscape. And that's how you would create this natural network. Next slide, please. So for Wildlands League, we're working on creating urban and near urban protection with many others working on the intervening landscapes. That's not our specialty, but what we're trying to call on, both for us and for many of the other groups, is really that Canada should be thinking about this regeneration economy and working at it at a scale that is at the landscape level. And again, not just in Southern Ontario, but across Canada, be thinking about where you have an urban landscape, a city, a rural landscape. How can you connect these things? How can you build infrastructure? I can actually start to ignite a regeneration economy. So what this looks like in puzzle pieces. Next slide. We believe Canada will emerge stronger if we invest in the restoration economy. We at Wildlands are working on the urban protection piece, others on the green infrastructure, restoration on the intervening landscape, land trusts, volunteers, and groups like Carolina, Canada, WWF. But the puzzle is not complete if we don't think about the rural landscape. And if we are to think at a landscape level to create a network of natural areas, we would include the rural puzzle piece. And that takes us to the work of ALUS and Laura. So thanks, Laura, for joining us. And we're going to switch over to you.
Okay, I'm going to unmute. on my Zoom learnings. So I guess, are we going to switch to we're switching to my screen, I guess. Okay.
Yeah.
Here we go. Thanks so much for the invitation to be here. ALUS is definitely one of the pieces of the puzzle. We are sort of a different way of looking at the issue around nature and farming. New ways of engaging with farmers and ranchers, new ways of creating markets to support restoration and rebuilding nature on farms. And so we thought actually we might start off with a poll. Eugenia, do you want to? So, oh, it says I can't vote anyway, so we'll know it's unbiased. But we do know how much agricultural land there is in Canada, across southern Canada, and how much it impacts nature and the economy. So as any nature strategy, of course, it has to play a role. The question is, how much do our participants think that that role is?
I think
So
almost everyone has answered. We'll just wait a few more seconds.
Okay, great.
Sounds like almost everyone has answered. So I will end polls now.
Wow, awesome.
Okay, I'll stop the hard sell then. Okay, wonderful. Okay, so ALUS is a program designed by farmers and ranchers. Our CEO is a rancher. All of our local committees have farmers or ranchers as chairs. And so we recognize that in terms of all of the ecological goods and services provided by farms, food is number one. But there are plenty of others that we need to support, such as wildlife habitat for species at risk, pollinators, migratory birds, waterfowl, as well as natural infrastructure, which Janet was talking about, water retention and filtration, helping with flood and drought mitigation, and soil and erosion protection. So that also is part of course, sustainable agriculture. The ALUS model is a principle-based model. We support farmers and ranchers to do projects that put nature back on farmland and ranch land. As I mentioned, these projects produce numerous benefits. Perhaps at this time, of course, people are really thinking about climate change, but also food security and the role that nature plays in making sure that when we go to the grocery store that we have things to eat. So the principles that guide our program implementation is, first of all, that it's community developed. So I mentioned farmers conceived the program. They are program leaders, and that whole community aspect is very, very important. It's also delivered by farmers and ranchers. Those are two of our Alberta participants there, who actually have adjoining ranches. One did a project and the other rancher saw what was happening and the good results that it was having, and he decided to sign up for the program as well. So we also target marginal land. We let the farmers decide what marginal is for them, unproductive land, et cetera, or particularly sensitive areas that we might, our coordinators might talk to particular farmers about doing a project on. So we have money from Environment Canada right now to do phosphorus reduction projects in Lake Erie. So in that case, we might be looking, we might say to our committees, we have money for this sort of project, so we can target what happens in that way as well. Although the local committees do have a lot of decision-making power, which is one of the very grassroots strengths of the program. We're also market-driven. We believe that the projects that we do have economic value, and very important in farm country is that it's voluntary. So we only go into communities that want the program, and of course farmers and ranchers only participate when it's something that they want to and it fits with their business. Integrated, we are not meant to be competitive with other environmental groups. If you go to one of our partnership advisory committee meetings, other NGOs will be there to talk about the work that they're doing. whether it's wildlife related or cover crop related. So it's all about trying to use resources as effectively as possible so conservation and restoration dollars get stretched to get as much outcome as possible. Accountable, it's very important that when people give resources to ALUS, that we're able to, we guarantee that they are going to get what they're paying for. So we have third-party verification. If you pay for a grassland, it's going to be there. And we also work with as many researchers as possible around monitoring the sort of outcomes that we're having. And of course, we're science-based. You know, we use whatever best available science is there to guide our program development and implementation. And researchers actually love working with ALUS. We create a conduit for good relationships between farmers, ranchers, and academics. So as I mentioned, ALUS was first conceived by farmers. It was in Manitoba in the 2000s. ALUS, which we don't use as an acronym now, it's just ALUS, but it did stand for Alternative Land Use Services. And our first concept was framed as a farmers conservation program. So alternative land use for a farmer would mean using your land for something other than producing food. And in this case, obviously producing nature and nature's benefits. So our program is very popular with farmers and ranchers because it was developed by farmers and ranchers, refined by them, and they are our leaders. And so it fits from a farmer and a rancher's perspective, their business and their desire to be stewards and to put nature back in certain areas. Each of our community programs has a partnership advisory committee. They have real authority. They make final decision about what projects take place. And of course, they're always looking for the best use of money, making sure that the best projects are the ones that get approval. So we can always use more resources. We have more communities that want the program, and in our existing community programs, we have more projects on the roster than we can support. So there's a big appetite for this program, which if anybody from a funder is on the call, please take note. So this is our partnership advisory committee from Vermilion River in Alberta. So we have 27 community programs across the country. We're very popular in Alberta, where we work very closely with municipalities. In Saskatchewan, we're part of two, so we're working with 17 municipalities in Alberta, lots of appetite for more. In Saskatchewan, we're in 2 watersheds, which are absolutely massive. They're about 35 to 40 counties each. We're missing a little dot in Manitoba. In Manitoba, we're in 2 watershed districts, which are also very, very large. You know, one of them I think is apparently the size of Nova Scotia or something. Anyway, actually, I'm just looking at the map. That's not true. Somewhere between the size of PEI and Nova Scotia. But these are big, big areas. And we're also working very closely with Manitoba Habitat Heritage Corporation, which is now administering money for the government of Manitoba to do work with farmers. In Ontario, we have our largest community, Norfolk, which many of you know, being nature fans, is very close to Long Point. That's where my boss is from, Brian. He's a rancher near Tilsonburg. And we have it's more than 15%, maybe 18% of the farmers in Norfolk County participate in our program. No end in sight to how many would sign on if we had the resources. But there's been, of course, a huge amount of tall grass prairie restoration take place in that area and across southwestern Ontario. So I know less than 1% of tall grass prairie survived in an original state. Our communities have become leaders in restoration. My boss said, you know, it took scientists and academics to realize it was a good idea to do the restoration, but it actually took farmers to figure out how to make that happen. So we have, you know, Joe Chafe, who's our chair for Norfolk County, has a specially adapted tractor. He's probably out planting right now. COVID hasn't stopped the restoration, but that is one of our fortes. And he's actually in demand in the US to go plant prairie down there. But so far he's got more than enough to keep him busy in Ontario. So we're in 8 communities in Ontario, lots of appetite for more. We're hoping to expand with resources. And in Quebec, we're working with the union of the UPA, the Farmers Union, as our implementation partner. And again, lots of opportunity to grow. Prince Edward Island runs the program, but it's run as a government program. We are now putting additional money in to do delayed haying and other wildlife related programs on top of what the government program is doing. So in terms of how ALUS actually operates, we are extremely grassroots. So our coordinators work with the landowners, with the farmers or the ranchers to determine what makes sense on their land. So marginal land is generally wet, near riparian areas, hard to get to, places that it makes sense to restore nature on. And you can see from this particular map that you would have connectivity happen on farms or ranches, and then when other farms and ranches start to hop on as well. So it's a program that makes sense from a farmer or rancher's perspective. And when you start scaling up, of course, you do see lots of connectivity for wildlife happen across at a landscape or watershed level. So wetlands, we're always focused on additionality. Wetlands, we do wetland creation, restoration, and enhancements, which might involve grass around the wetland area and trees and shrubs. Grassland projects. So as I mentioned, our farmers are the experts at this in Southwestern Ontario. We actually now supply our own seed for our other ALUS projects. So it's, this is, and the more grassland that we can put back, the better it is for wildlife. Afforestation. So afforestation is a big part of our program as well. And there's always an emphasis on native trees, best species for the environment, placed in the best place. And there's a lot of creativity around these projects as well. We do eco buffers and shelter belts, all which protect soil, retain water. And we're looking at some farmers want to put edible species in, right? Nuts and fruits and whatever, which have benefits for wildlife. And of course, can also become a commercial crop. Riparian buffers. So this is a drainage area in Eastern Ontario, and it actually is the same place. So if you don't, someone once questioned me about whether or not this was real or just two different areas put together. You can look on our website, and we've got pictures I think this is over 8 years, but we've got pictures in the intervening years. And native plants put on productive land to protect water has an amazing result. So all sorts of wildlife, carbon, climate benefits from this sort of work. So we employ a lot of people, actually, which we didn't really think that much about until COVID, and people really worried about jobs, especially in rural Canada. So the more resources we have, the more we can expand, the more people we can employ, and we do tend to attract young professionals with environmental science training, agricultural training, and it keeps them in their community, and it's a very positive, place of employment. So we'd like to employ as many people as we can. We also use contractors for putting our projects into the ground. So during COVID, we're really happy. We haven't actually lost any projects. And I guess social distancing is easier when you're somewhere like this, but that does create real revenue for people that live in rural Canada as well. And of course, we pay the farmers management fees for taking care of the programs. And so this is also a revenue stream for farmers and ranchers. That's really important when the margins around farming are so tight. So we do, it's not a giveaway. They have to work for their annual payment. It'll be things like Phragmites control for wetlands, maintaining fence lines to keep livestock out of riparian areas. There's always a management component to make sure that our projects are continuing to function at a high ecological and hydrological level. Eugenia, can I just do a time check? I can be.
Yep, we have about 4 minutes.
Okay. So what exactly are we producing for society, right? So, climate mitigation is very important. So when farmers sign on to have an ALUS project, they take land out of production and they put nature back. So that reduces the inputs that they would otherwise be putting on the land, and it means that they're sequestering carbon. Janet had that great photo of the house being flooded out. So we retain, in a very simple way of thinking about it, we keep water, we slow water down. So that of course helps reduce the impact of floods, and it also keeps water during times of drought, which is very important. And apparently with climate change, drought will be costing us more than flood, if you can believe it. So it's important that we slow and retain water across watersheds. This is just a natural infrastructure slide that some of you might be aware of. So it's not only on the farmland that you see benefits, but downstream. Communities benefit from flood and drought mitigation and reducing water treatment costs. So of course, this is an infamous, horrible picture of Lake Erie. So we also know that keeping nutrients and on the land is important, and that's a large part of what we do. So we have good coverage on Lake Erie, and of course we're hoping to expand to other parts of Canada where we can also help deal with some of these issues. Okay, goal number 2. Eugenia, I forget what this one was. Okay, because we're getting into biodiversity now. So also I'm not allowed to vote, and I don't actually know the answer. So
Yeah.
counting on you, Eugenia.
80, 123, and over 160. For how many species at risk live in Southern Ontario?
Okay, we're just getting a few more submissions. Okay, that's pretty much everyone.
We've got a smart crowd.
Okay, so we at ALUS would like to see that go to 123, back to 80, and back to 0. And that's exactly what we're hoping to achieve with putting nature back on the landscape.
Yeah.
So native pollinators, a lot of pollinators are ground dwelling. So once you take land out of crop production and put nature and trees and grasses, then you've got a lot of habitat, which is very important, of course, for agriculture as well. Species like badgers that have large land requirements. We've been able to change the conversation to, if we're supporting you to create habitat, it's as an incentive rather than a regulatory requirement. It makes farmers more inclined to let nature be. So I know we're tight for time here. So I just want to close with talking about, ALUS is a kind of a refreshing approach around celebrating farmer and ranchers' contribution to nature, creating new avenues to link agriculture and urban communities and bring people to farms to talk about nature and agriculture and learn all sorts of things that they might not be aware of. And we are really focused on outcomes on the land. So we measure our projects by acre. We're really interested. We work with as many researchers as we can around wildlife numbers, how to make our projects more effective. So it's really an iterative program, and it really celebrates everybody's being part of solutions and contributing to nature and those sorts of outcomes. So we are really focused on building resilient communities in terms of economy and the natural world, both urban and rural. And ALUS is really about people. So we have our local committees. We're really engaged with our farmers and ranchers. We love making the connections between Canadians who aren't farmers and ranchers and what's going on agricultural landscapes. And so when COVID is over, if you haven't been on an ALUS tour, I'd really recommend that you get onto our mailing list and come out and see our projects and meet our producers and be a part of our whole program. So I think that is it.
Okay, great. Thanks so much, Laura, and thanks, Janet. Now we'd love to take a moment. If you have any questions, please pop them in the Q&A box. We'd love to answer any questions you may have. Just take a few seconds. Meanwhile, I do have one question that, oh yes, go ahead.
Sorry, I was just going to say, Laura, I just wanted to thank you so much. I just love the work of ALUS. And I think, especially for us, we focus very much on how to create a protected area. And when we combine efforts and when we see how that can actually work to exponentially change things, it is really exciting. I think we can do some exciting things on the landscape. So thanks very much.
So we have one question from Lynn. Do farmers and ranchers stay on the ALUS program for many years?
Yes, so we do. In a way, it's a transactional program. So farmers and ranchers put up their hand to do projects. We work with them on deciding what that project looks like. The project goes into the ground, and then we pay them on an annual basis to do maintenance. So I mentioned it might be Phragmites control for wetlands in southern Ontario, or fence maintenance, but they are part of the program. And we use relatively, from a conservation perspective, right? Janet, you guys are thinking in hundreds or thousands of years about protected areas and corridors, but from a farmer and a rancher's perspective, they're used to producing on an annual basis, whether it's, crop rotations or taking their livestock, calving or whatever happens. It all happens on an annual basis. So we have contracts that are based on a number of years, but we've lost very few at the end of those years. So we'll generally do a 5-year contract, and then most farmers, because it makes sense, right? They volunteered to be part of the program. They've done projects that they're involved with. They generally have some financial skin in the game as well. Then they just continue. They'll sign a new contract. So the only time that we actually lose farmers is generally also part of nature when people die and the land is sold. We have been trying to get as quickly as possible to the new farmers or ranchers who have bought the land to say, hey, that's actually a project over there, that wetland or whatnot, or grassland. And so if you'd like, we'll sign a contract with you and you can continue. So we've had success with that as well. But generally it's a voluntary program and the farmers want to continue year after year.
I also noted in your presentation where you talked about one farmer basically went viral because his neighbors saw it, and I think that's one of the things that I've experienced personally with your boss, Brian. He's so enthusiastic about the program. You couldn't not want to do it. You almost want to go and get a farm next to Brian just so you could do a project with him, because it's so it's kind of life-changing. It's so inspiring in terms of the work that you guys are doing.
Yeah, and so we do, when we've, in Norfolk and other communities where we have a large program, we do have farmer liaisons. So farmers are the best people to talk to other farmers, or ranchers to other ranchers. So we actually have, we pay farmers to be the spokespeople for the program, because they're not going to be that interested to talking to me from Riverdale. What do I know about farming? Not much, according to my boss. So you want farmers and ranchers to be talking to farmers and ranchers. And we do have lots of, I know another story from Brian about, one farmer doing a grassland project or whatnot, and their neighbor thinking, well, maybe that's a little unusual, but then finding out or seeing that other farmer with the project didn't need to pay for bees, because they were getting free pollination services from all of the native pollinators that the project was supporting. So all of a sudden you start to have this whole very interesting ecosystem of human behavior and, neighbors and neighbors to neighbors. And so that's really the best way for our program to grow.
Fantastic. So we have another question here, and this is actually a question that some other attendees have had. How does someone go about volunteering for ALUS, or how can the public help, especially if you're not necessarily, physically close to a farm, or maybe you're not necessarily associated with farmers?
So I've been working in the environmental sector for a long time, and I realized at a certain point that the easiest way for people to make a difference is to write a check. right, Janet? So you can support ALUS Canada's work. Go to our website. There's a portal there. You can also get on mailing lists for our local communities. You know, if you do live in Toronto, it's going to be a drive, no lie, but contact our local coordinators. They're all listed on our website. And come on a tour. And there's ways to get involved in different activities. Out west, I know they were building bat boxes and there's tree planting stuff, but generally it's a program about farmers doing the work on their farm. Ranchers doing that. So it's like there are opportunities. So yeah, if you just make your interest known, it's useful to us.
And I think we're all asking for support of this work as part of the reemergence from COVID, that we want to see all levels of government actually, when they look to what is the next economy look like, how are we going to rebuild that? And our contention is that it actually be done by supporting the work of that Canada, that provinces and territories or provinces and municipalities start to really think about how do we actually think about nature as an ally? How do we support the rural economy? And part of that work would be supporting programs that ALUS does, but also thinking about this is a landscape level problem, and how do we actually use all the pieces of the puzzle so that they work together to build a more resilient community and more resilient economy and better for nature.
Yeah, and just to that point, so there was a study done about Lake Erie and the cost of the phosphorus, the algal blooms, and it's $6 billion over 30 years. Those are hard costs to tourism, to water treatment and commercial fisheries. Like, just think about, we don't need, I'm not asking for the whole 6 billion over 30 years, but you know, we could do a lot to enhance economic use with a portion of that money. So it makes economic sense. Same thing for flood and drought, right? And road maintenance. Investing in nature is a very smart move with lots and lots of returns.
Great. And we had also another question here about how much is ALUS affected by COVID right now? Has it changed any of the programs or, you know, the way that it's impacted ALUS?
So ALUS staff generally work at home. Some people work in conservation authority offices or whatnot. So it hasn't affected ALUS staff. And we were a little bit worried about what was going to be happening on our farms and ranches, but our coordinators are telling us it's business as usual. I mentioned Joe Chafe and Lindsay Buchanan down in southwestern Ontario apparently are out planting prairie grass, probably right now. So it's not, it hasn't affected our operations, but I think what it's done is actually make people think more about farming and food security in Canada. So we're hoping, of course, to see that recognition around the need for sustainable agriculture, but also getting rural Canadians to work. You know, we do employ a lot of people, 2.5 people for every community, plus the income support for, you know, payment for ecosystem services for farmers and ranchers. So it's an opportunity, right, with lots and lots of returns to put money into programs like ALUS and the other restoration work being done by our NGO colleagues. So it's, we're really happy that we haven't lost any projects, that our staff are all safe. I'm working under a home invasion with my teenagers at home, another story. But, you know, we are, so it's business as usual, but we're really hoping that, you know, of course, we feel badly for anyone who's affected, you know, losing income or being sick, of course, but we're hoping it's a little bit of an opportunity in Canada to think a little bit differently about our economy and nature.
Great. If anybody has any last minute questions, please feel free to drop them in the Q&A box.
Eugenia, you had a couple of questions that I think came in before the webinar.
There are, and I think Laura answered quite a few of them, but it'd be great to hear a little bit more, Laura, especially about how investments in ecosystem services can spark green growth and create rural jobs. And I know that you mentioned a few of those in your presentation, but we'd love to hear more.
Yeah, so we do know, so I talked about natural infrastructure. You know, this is hands-on work, right? So contractors, regional staff, farmer liaisons, farmers and ranchers. This isn't like, you know, building a computer app and, you know, like this is hands-on. This is real work on real land. So there are lots of opportunities for jobs. And then in terms of economic benefits, there are the pollination services, creating habitat for game species, those sorts of things. But it's the natural infrastructure, the avoided costs that are probably the greatest. And that, if there's an investment in natural infrastructure, it means that there are more dollars to do other things in rural Canada and municipalities downstream, et cetera. So, you know, we have, you know, like a few anecdotes about that. You know, Halifax Water had put in a big water treatment plant. They weren't reaching the nitrate levels that they needed. They were going to have to put in a $150,000 upgrade. They worked with one farmer in one particular area and negated the need to do that upgrade. We know that water treatment in Edmonton has $1 million episodes with surface water events. And so think about, again, what could we do with, you know, $1 million upstream from Edmonton to reduce all of that organic matter from going into the river. So there's all sorts of avoided costs. It's just good financial management to be investing in nature, protecting rural communities, creating jobs, and reaping all sorts of economic benefits down the road.
Yeah. And in terms of opportunities, are there any opportunities for youth, for young adults, young students that are interested in this work?
Yeah, so we have a very youthful, except for me, staff. We do, like, we're keeping younger Canadians in rural communities. We provide really good employment. So yeah, so the more resources we have, the bigger our scope, and of course, the more job opportunities.
Fantastic. And you had mentioned a little bit about the different programs that are existing right now in ALUS. Are there any other programs that currently exist to incentivize farmers and ranchers to do even more for ecological services?
So all of our G7 partners have national programs. Canada is the only country without a national program. There are, the Canadian Agricultural Partnership, which gives money, federal dollars to provinces. They might fund some startup costs for projects and whatnot. There might be cover crop dollars through Ontario Soil and Crop. So there's different bits of money here and there, different large bits of money, but there's nothing to sort of bring it all together like ALUS does on an ongoing basis with farmers and ranchers. So, and of course you want to consider the whole bundle of ecological goods and services that land provides. So ALUS is able to do that. We're able to, think of the best projects for wildlife, climate, natural infrastructure, and make the most efficient use of resources.
Yeah, no, ALUS is really a very interesting and unique program. First time I've heard of it, so I'm very excited to learn more, and I'd love to take a tour, so I'm very excited about it.
Yeah, so we do great tours in Norfolk and other parts of Ontario, so yeah, we'll make sure you're on the list.
Yeah.
Fantastic. All right, so if there are no more questions, I want to thank you, ALUS, thank you, Laura Ellis from ALUS. It's almost a tongue twister. And thank you so much, Janet, for joining us today for another wonderful webinar. If any of you have any further questions, please feel free to contact Laura or Janet. We'd love to connect more and talk more about rural investments. Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks very much, everybody. Don't forget the survey.
Yes, don't forget the survey. Thanks so much.